For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, here we go, episode 43 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Thanks for tuning in to another edition. Want to remind you, please subscribe to the podcast if you are not already, and make sure you'll get the latest episodes right when they drop. And also, if you're digging the show, give us a rating or a review on Spotify or iTunes. 5-star rating, and on iTunes, write a review. That really helps the show. So if you enjoy it, please go ahead and do that. Okay, today's episode, Jackson Hill is on the show. It's going to be a fun one. This one's long overdue. Jackson Hill is a longtime childhood friend of mine. We've done all kinds of adventures in the backcountry over the years, but the main topic of today's discussion is our 70-day canoe descent of the Yukon River, from starting in Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory and then ending in the Bering Sea. The Yukon is the largest river of Alaska. I believe it's the third longest in North America. It took us 70 days and was just an absolutely amazing journey through the interior of Alaska and the bush, and just an absolutely epic journey. So without further ado, episode 43 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with Jackson Hill. Jackson, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I've been enjoying listening to your show the last 2 years on my drives, and I'm stoked to be here.
Oh, that's good, man. We just you're in Missoula, Montana right now, and we just did a trip in Bend, Oregon what was it, a couple weekends ago?
Yeah, I think 2 weeks ago.
Skied Mount Bachelor in Bend, Oregon, so that was a lot of fun, and it was good to catch up. And dude, excited to talk about adventure and go over the mighty Yukon River that you and I paddled back in 2018, right?
I think so.
2018. It seems like
it feels longer ago.
I know it does feel longer ago, but
a lot's really changed.
Yes, it has, since we were living on the mighty Yukon River. Well, we've done. You and I grew up together. We've done so many outdoor trips and so much stuff together. I guess first, give me like a breakdown of maybe some of our trips together, and give me like an overview of the Yukon if you can, and the Yukon trip that you would talk to somebody about. I guess that's kind of a broad question, but.
Well, I think the first trip we did outside of kind of going to ski areas was we were 18 and we did the Wind Rivers trip, and we went to Titcomb Basin and did the classic kind of 6-day trip there. We had Peter Irving with us, and I think that's the first time we really kind of broke into the wild. And then from there, it was about every couple of years we met up for backpacking trips. You were in CU and I was at MSU, so I think maybe the next one was kind of going up to the Beartooths, which still up there with one of my favorite trips. Just kind of just epic. 8 days off trail. Totally did not go as planned. Did not make it to the other car, but
yeah, just absolutely great trip. Yeah, the Wind Rivers in Wyoming, the Beartooths in Montana.
Yeah, and but yeah, then kind of working towards the Yukon. It all kind of started with you asking me to run the Gunnison with you. I think we did it over Memorial Day weekend, maybe 2014. It's the first time I'd ever, I think, even stepped in pretty much a boat, let alone a canoe. And was kind of like, why have I been backpacking the last 10 years? This is so much better.
Yeah, I convinced you. We were both in Colorado at that time, and this is the early seeds of the mighty Yukon River, 70 days across Alaska and Canada, and the Gunnison River in Colorado near the I don't remember what section we did, but it was an amazing section.
We put in at Delta, Colorado.
Okay.
And took it down to
Whitewater, was it?
The large town right on the border of Utah.
Oh yes, Grand Junction. Grand Junction.
Yep.
Okay, but regardless, amazing trip. And at that point, we had both been, big backpackers and just wilderness people who love getting out in the woods. And when I first took you on that canoe trip, or when we went together, it was like a shift change. It was like, wait a minute, there's all these wild places. I don't have to take all of my gear on my back and crush my legs and knees, and I can take the kitchen sink, maybe slip in a 30 rack if I'm feeling a little wild, which often we were, and you're off for a great wilderness adventure.
Yeah. No, I mean, it set off a whole string of events over the next, up until now. And that trip in particular, we've kept, I don't know if either of us have done it, but our group of friends now has done that, pretty much annual Memorial Day trip since then for maybe 6 years now.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of rivers doing that.
Yeah, and that was when we would do that was Memorial Day in May, right? Is Memorial Day in May? I'm showing
Memorial Day in May, trying to find, the few rivers out there that you can actually canoe that aren't blown out and, flooding. And so it was always kind of bopping around.
Yeah, okay, so just rounding out a few trips since we're going through them, and I wrote down a quick list. We got the Wind Rivers, these are just a quick brainstorm that I did of trips that we've done together. The Wind Rivers in Wyoming, a backpacking trip. We've done that a couple of times. Beartooths in Montana we mentioned. We've done Moab a number of times. We've done the Green River in Moab canoeing. Snowy Mountains in Wyoming. We've done the Pintlers in Montana, the Pintler Mountains. The Missouri Breaks canoe trip in Montana. That was a great one. We mentioned the Gunnison River, and then we had an ill-fated attempt at the North Platte River on the border of Colorado and Wyoming, where I ended up in the hospital and we had to cancel things. But maybe a story for another day, maybe down the line on the podcast, depends how it goes.
Yeah, I think that one was my only true failure of a trip.
Yeah, it was not great. But all of that in turn built us up basically to the Yukon. And how do you explain the Yukon River trip to somebody when you're out at a bar and your girlfriend Cicely's like, yeah, Jackson did this awesome river trip, or or how do you explain the Yukon River trip?
That's a tricky question because I'm sure it's changed over time, and my feelings on it have probably changed over time. And and it's now it's so nostalgic, and I just I think back on it, and every single day was pristine, which I know it wasn't. And but it was just a hell of a trip, and for me, I kind of just had the advice of you from your previous long trips in the Brooks Range and Mississippi, and and thinking about those things you were telling me and not believing you, and thinking back on it now and how right you were by most of it. But it's just it was a long ways. We saw a lot of country, and we saw every landscape and the people, and when I look back on it, and probably the people we met, probably had the biggest impression on me from the whole trip.
Yeah, absolutely. But so breaking it down as far as all that is absolutely true, and I'm stoked to get into it. And it's going to be fun to recall some stories. But breaking it down just from like a logistical perspective, if somebody had no idea what the Yukon River was, or even like what this trip entailed, like how do you bullet list to somebody like, yeah, I sat in a boat and did this for 70 days? Or I guess just breaking down the river.
Yeah, well, like what a lot of people ask me is like, so you guys just floated down it? And it's like, no, no. If we floated down it, we would have went backwards. It was pretty much wind in our face the whole time. And so I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions people have until they hear about it. Is it was like, I mean, most days probably paddled 8 hours a day. We'd get out of the boat once, not we had our pee jugs. We wouldn't even get out of the boat for that, and we paddled, and like a majority of the trip is probably actually us sitting in silence, just paddling. And that's really what it was. There's a lot of river trips out there where they're not paddling trips, they're floating trips, but it was a paddle trip. We paddled and we paddled and we paddled some more, and eventually 2,000 miles you get to the end. But
yes, it's just I completely agree. And just to set the scene a little bit, so the Yukon River, it's the third largest river in North America, depending on how you go. And correct me and hop in here if I'm wrong on any of this stuff, but it starts in Canada in Whitehorse and traverses all the way across Alaska and kind of bisects Alaska north and south. The largest river system of Alaska, and it starts in Canada, cuts all the way across, runs through all of these awesome, amazing native villages before emptying out into the Bering Sea, which is where we finally caught a plane out of the Bering Sea, out of Alaska, and back home to Montana at the time. It was a 70-day trip, 2,000 miles, and you're right. It was just an amazing journey.
yeah, I mean, up until that point, I'd probably been on, I mean, not a ton, maybe 5 or 6 kind of 4-day canoe trips, some with you, and on those trips, we're doing 70 or 80 miles, and it felt like a big distance. We're out in the Missouri Breaks in Montana, and it feels like long ways. And then we get on the Yukon, and some days we're doing that entire distance in one day. The first 8 days we did 550 miles, and it didn't even seem that hard. And I think part of that's the excitement of what we were doing. It was, I mean, we're just cruising, and we had goals and we had to keep them. And it sounds silly to think like winter's coming at August. But it was true. I mean, the weather was changing, and we had to get paddling. So
yeah, so we started in 2018. We started in the beginning of July, June.
Yeah, we put in I think right at the first week of June, because we had solstice maybe 2 weeks later in Dawson.
Okay, and we took out 70 days later, I guess, which would have been what?
Yeah. August 15th or August 16th. And I think we actually hit our goal within a day from like where we'd started. I think we kind of said we need to probably be wrapping up around August 15th, and we did.
And how can you, in my mind, I think of like 3 distinct sections of the river. Like you have the Canada section, and again, we're talking about a 2,000-mile river. Just to give some perspective, at the beginning, it's small and fairly narrow, and by the end of it, towards the mouth of the Bering Sea, there, it's I don't know how many miles wide, but at places over 5 miles wide, and so this is a river that changes a lot, and I think there's different sections that are kind of broken down on that. Like, how would you describe the different sections if you had to slice them up and just kind of with a broad stroke, like describe the different sections of river?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there was kind of like maybe 4 or 5 distinct pieces. And what's really interesting from where we started, there's a couple glacial lakes high above the river. And so I think the top lakes were Atlin Lakes, maybe, and then it went down into Marsh Lake. And so we put in right where Marsh Lake actually turns into the river. And what's interesting about putting in there is you only paddle about 1 day, and then you get to a 50 or 60 mile lake crossing. So it's like you get like this very short time on the river. Then all of a sudden you're kind of dealt like this first big obstacle, which we got pretty lucky with. We had some bad weather that first half of the day on it, but then we started the next morning, and we had probably 40 miles on that lake, just pure glass. And then you do the next maybe 100 miles, and it's crystal clear. So it kind of seemed, I mean, I remember the moment that the silt came in. It was when we the Teslin River, I think, was what it was.
Or the White River, I believe.
Well, there was the White River, which made it really milky, but
Right.
but then before that, it became murky, and it was right where that giant that old steamship that we found way up on the shoreline.
Yeah,
We were
absolutely.
exploring that.
So in
And
the
then,
beginning, it's a crystal clear turquoise, like super colorful, vibrant. Like you can see the bottom, and it's like, I guess turquoise, I think, is the best way to describe the color of the river, right?
yeah, I mean, it's just the bluest water you can imagine.
And what are some of the other, generally speaking, sections of the river from there?
So then, like you said, when the Milk River came in, which was maybe 200 or 300 miles later, I mean, it went from murky to really looking like chocolate milk. And you watch that water coming off the Milk River, and there's a reason they call it the Milk River, because it just looks like milk. It's just insane. It's also where the river seemed to, like, in my memory, started getting pretty big, and there's starting to be like debris in the river, and the banks were getting like really tall and really cut. And then for me, I think you kind of have from there essentially to the Canadian border, which I'm not sure how many miles, maybe 400 miles. I think the Canada section was about 600 miles, 700 miles in total. And you're in the woods, you're in the trees. And then pretty much as soon as we crossed that border into Alaska, pretty much starting at Eagle, which was the start of the Yukon Charlie National Wildlife Refuge or National Park.
Yeah.
I mean, it just changed to the desert. I mean, more or less, and the days were long and they're hot, and it was tricky, and that's when the river became incredibly windy. And we got really lucky, I think, with the paths we took, because Will and I have friends here in Montana that we met on the river, and they tell us their stories about going to the Yukon Flats and having to go back upstream and drag their boats. And we
it gets
never
really
got caught in that.
Gets really braided there, which is another distinct section of the river, right? It gets all braided near Fort Yukon, and it goes from being one real big channel into being like thousands of intertwined fingerlings that, if you're not careful, is infamous for throwing people off. We were lucky that we had pretty good fortunes through there.
No, we were, and we also had maps that were from like the 1940s, some of them, and half the islands and sloughs that were on that map didn't actually exist or had been eroded out. And there was towns that weren't there, there was cabins that weren't there. I mean, so we got lucky there. So, and then for me, I think the next section would have been getting to the bridge crossing in Alaska.
The Dalton Highway crossing there. I think they call it Yukon Crossing. The
Yukon Crossing.
So there's two bridges in 2,000 miles of this wilderness river, and one of them is right at the beginning, which would be in Whitehorse, I believe, or in Carmacks. There's one in Carmacks.
Carmacks, yeah.
First Nations village in Canada, and the second one is where the Alaskan Pipeline and the Dalton Highway cross the Yukon River, called Yukon Crossing. And other than that, there is no other bridge crossing this massive river, which is kind of wild to think about. But yeah, so once you get there, that river is what? Big, wide, kind of like starting to get in your face.
Single channel. Yeah. And that's also when I think things got tricky. We kind of, one of the major themes of that trip was just looking for water. And it sounds so silly that we're in one of the biggest rivers in the world, and we continually did not have fresh water to drink. And I remember kind of, after that, for the next couple of weeks, it was, anything we could find, puddles. I mean, we were to the point where we're like licking the water off leaves pretty much.
Yeah, there's some funny stories in there about that. That's one of the things I have written about. One of the things I learned from this trip is we should have been settling our water. We're in this huge, really murky, dirty river. So as you mentioned, we were always looking for clean water to come in, clean creeks and rivers that would pour tributaries that would come into the Yukon, and that's where we would supply our clean water from. But there were so many times that we were struggling to find those tributaries to come in, and we would, I remember, pumping from the like tiny little rain puddle that had been there for weeks on a sandbar that tasted like jet fuel and dyed our
bunch of
water
seagulls sitting in it. And, yeah. So I think the next section, was that big white just that big wide section, and I think that went to essentially extended to a town called Mountain Village, maybe somewhere past Russian Mission, and then that's when this tide started coming in, and it actually
we're working our way
again.
closer to the Bering Sea now.
Yeah, so now we're kind of like entering the delta. So then I'd say that delta was kind of the final stretch.
Yeah,
and it kind of turned back a bit to the flats where it got very braided. We started going down a lot of side sloughs. The wind was blowing.
Yeah, but it's just a big river. It's just massive river. Anyone who's been on, the Mississippi, the Mackenzie, the Yukon, the Missouri, and places, like, you kind of have a comprehension. And I'm sure there's all kinds of amazing big rivers around the world that I'd like to check out. But yeah, it's just such big water. Okay, so we have like a general overlay of the different sections of the Yukon. What do you have any particular story that comes to mind as like a common story you tell, or just like a favorite story or moment or time from the trip? That's a broad question, but just
I do. I think I have like 10 of them. Like there's like memories, unfortunately, that are like fading, but that, I have like my 10 like big memories, and some of them, I'm not even sure why I remember them so clearly, but like there's certain campsites. I remember one at the beginning where we're camped on a little small island, maybe on day 4, and there's this pink sunset, and it's actually a small river at that point, so there's shallow spots that might have even still been clear, and I remember that one. Most of my memories, though, are usually with the people we met. I like my fondest memories are, hanging out with Jake the Russian and hanging out.
And tell the story of Jake the Russian. I'm glad you brought that up because I have all these memories written down, but Jake the Russian was not one of them. So set the scene for Jake the Russian for me, who is a character that we met along the river.
So I mean, that's a big scene to set. So the day before we meet Jake the Russian, I think, our provisions were getting low, and we were coming into a town. I think it was called Galena.
And when we say town, we they are towns, but they're small, often native villages. So there's not a whole bunch going on. There's, oftentimes, depending on the size of the town or the village that we're in, they're anywhere from 20 to 200 or 300 or 400 people is probably the biggest one, I would think. They're not very big.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them. I mean, I know we stopped at some, and there was no grocery stores. We were so excited to get to some towns, and then we can't even get coffee. And so Galena was actually one of the larger towns. Again, there's no road access. There's only air and boat access. It's really far, to actually get from a bridge there on a boat. But we were excited to get there. And I remember the day before, we're kind of sitting there in the boat, and we're getting antsy, and we don't, we're really wanting a cold beer. And, and I think we both know, like, we can just get to Galena, we can get some cold beer. And it was about every 3 weeks or so, we could get a cold beer. And then the day before, we're paddling along. I remember they're on the north side of the river up against the shore, and a motorboat came up to us really quick. And usually, if motorboats were coming up to us that quick and not slowing down, we were kind of prepared to, kind of be hassled with a little bit, because we're, they know that they're going to be throwing their wake at us, and it's going to be an issue. And the boat's so way down, and we're riding so low. But these guys all of a sudden kind of pulled on the brakes, pulled up, and then like, look at us. Hey, you guys want some cold beer? And I can't remember the man's name now, but I remember it was him and his wife. Steven, yeah, and him and his wife, and maybe the mother or grandmother in this boat, and so we get on the boat with them, and
yeah, we're in the middle of nowhere, floating, super hot. It's 24 hours of sunlight, so the sun never sets. It just goes around on this massive river. Haven't seen really anybody for a long time. And like you said, this motorboat just starts beelining it straight for us. And like you said, they slow down, ask us if we want beer. We hop over into their boat and start having a couple cold ones.
Yeah, and not only were they cold ones, they were like good beer. I mean, they had like craft brews, and we're talking like the nearest like brewery is probably 700-800 miles from here. And it was great. I mean, we tied our boat up to their boat, and then at that point, we're about 5 miles from Galena, and they're going to help us out, with getting some provisions. And we're like, well, this is the only time we did it. And we actually, we regretful. We were like, well, we'll let you guys take us. So we pull our canoe into the big front of this kind of fishing boat, a skiff, and we start zooming the 5 miles to Galena. We only make it about a couple miles on that boat, and Will and I are sitting at the front of the boat, the driver's in the back, and so is his wife and the grandmother, and all of a sudden, we both see this sandbar in the middle of the river. And you got to remember, this river, it looks like the Colorado River. It looks like chocolate milk. So like trying to identify a sandbar from distance is really tricky, and there's so much silt that the sandbar locations are always changing. And we hit this sandbar going pretty fast, and beached the entire motorboat, which even though it wasn't that big, it's still a heavy boat.
Yeah, it was a solid aluminum. Aluminum's light as far as boats, but a big, solid, probably 18-foot aluminum skiff with a huge, heavy motor on it. And I remember we were flying. And we just spent the evening just having like the best time ever. Cold beers, new friend offers to give us a ride, and then all of a sudden all of our stuff in the front of the boat, and I just remember yelling like, "Sandbar!" and then slide into the sandbar. And I remember our canoe and some of our gear flying out of the bow of the motorboat as we hit the sandbar, and flying off onto the sandbar, which it was barely even a sandbar. It was like mud.
Yeah, it's just a mud pit, essentially. That was like a half inch above the water. And so then came the next like hour and a half of us working with Steven trying to get the boat off the sandbar, which at this point it isn't like some of the boats still in the water. I mean, the entire boat is on this bar.
We were rocking it, trying to dig out a channel so that water could flow underneath it.
Yep. And I remember the wife and the grandmother, they wouldn't get off the boat. So, they're still sat on the boat as we're trying to get the boat back into the water. And then we finally get the boat back into the water, and Steven kind of looks at us like, all right, jump back on, I'll take you the rest of the way. And the ladies look at us like, you ain't getting back on this boat.
Yeah.
And so now, they leave us on the island. It's a storm was coming in, and we end up camping on this, not an island, a mud bar. That's like a half an inch above the water line. All it takes is a little rain, and like this thing's going to flood. But we set up our tents. And at this point, we can almost see like the town we need to get to, but the weather is bad. So we camp, we wake up, and I remember looking behind the tent, and it's just like dark, black, purple clouds, just like looks hellish. And it's like, all right, we got to get all the stuff in the boat. We got to get packed up, and we got to get across this river. And it wasn't an easy river crossing. We had the barge, the wind was blowing, the waves were big. Huge rollers. And so we finally get across the river. We get to Galena, and we get to this beach. And how it happened a lot on this trip, a random person came down and started talking to us and was so generous and, brought us in and, moving forward in that night, at the end of the night, we're taking shots of vodka and eating salmon eggs that, we're cutting out of the salmon moments earlier. He's teaching us how to fish with some of the native methods. It was incredible.
Yeah, it was awesome. And Jake the Russian was an interesting guy in himself. He was basically just like a recluse who lived basically as a hermit in the middle of nowhere in Alaska off the Yukon River, and took us in, and like you said, he gave us fresh Russian vodka, took us out fishing, and we had fresh, I don't know if it would be called caviar or what would it, it's not caviar, it's
I forget what they sell it as. They sell it to the Chinese, I think.
It's not there's a term for it, but yeah, fresh salmon eggs with crackers. And he was just like the most interesting oddball intellectual who I think I've ever met. Just like a complete intellectual hermit in the middle of nowhere, living by himself in a cabin in Alaska.
Yeah, no, exactly. And one of the really funny parts about that, I remember him giving us his truck,
Yes.
He only met us like 10 minutes before. He's like, hey, take my truck. And there's only a few roads, but we were able to take it to the grocery store and take it to the to the beer store and, get our things. And thinking back on it, it's like, there's nowhere we could have gone. We couldn't have stolen the truck. There's no roads. There's no roads to this town. The farthest the truck could have made it from him is about a mile. And I remember he was also really proud of us for like doing so well, at, like getting our stuff that we needed and meeting people. And, but that's also in Galena. That's when we met that really interesting, I believe he was a Swiss guy.
You're right.
And this guy, I mean, was one of the most incredible athletes like I'd ever met in the world. I mean, he was 60 years old, and he was saying he was a butcher until he was about 50. Decided he didn't want to be a butcher anymore. Hadn't done any big adventures. 10 years later, he set the world record for the quickest bike ride from the most northern point of North America to the most southern point of South America. And it took him about like 105 days to go 25,000 kilometers. And so he was doing the Yukon River solo, and we're probably at this point on day 45, and he's on day like 16.
Like more than twice our age and more than twice as fast, just absolutely crushing it.
Yeah, he had like a free 3 weeks. We had a free summer.
Yeah, it is one of the awesome things about these types of trips, though, and putting yourself out there. Like when we signed up to, and I say signed up, when we committed to doing this Yukon River trip, I think that was one of the most like surprising aspects of it to me, and maybe to you too. I don't know, you can say, but after coming off of the Mississippi, like the Mississippi River, 103 days canoeing the Mississippi source to sea, it was all about the people, and like the river towns and stopping in and like seeing the history of America. And going on this Yukon River trip, I was thinking it was going to be like man against nature, like just crazy wilderness out there. But it also still comes down to the people. Like we met so many amazing people in some of these little villages along the way that are just living, doing their thing out in what we call the bush in the absolute middle of nowhere, like living with, little electricity, no plumbing, bears everywhere, just doing their thing. And we met so many awesome people. It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's just for being in America too. I mean, it's a totally different world. You cannot believe that you're in the same country until you see what it is up there. I mean, it's and I'm sure there's other places. I haven't been down south. I'm sure some of those places on the Mississippi, when you're in the bayous and stuff, I mean, it's just out of this world. But being up there for me, I mean, I had no idea that there was people that live this way, in the United States, and I mean, it's just eye opening. And all those interactions with people are so special because there was a couple times we had some pretty big breaks, like it wasn't like we're running into meeting great people every day. It's, we're kind of had these special moments because we would have these big distances, but no, I mean, everybody was just incredibly generous up till the last day. I mean, I think that last day we were like trying to figure out what to do with all the fish people have been giving us. Cause like every boat we passed would just drive up and give us a whole salmon, and they would never let you refuse anything. So we're like sitting there like with all these salmon in the boat, like, all right, we got to figure this out.
What was your favorite, and then I want to get to some like wilderness stuff and animals and stuff like that. But what was one of your favorite, like, I don't know, like Alaskan or native takeaways? Like, you got, for instance, you have like the Fishwheel, you have like smoking fresh salmon, you have the moose. We were gifted moose ribs, and like just the totally different style of life than you would get in Chicago. What was your favorite aspect of that we ran into?
I mean, I love seeing the traditional culture. I mean, like even though it's modern times, I mean, people are still doing things the way they were 100 years ago. Like we were looking at fish wheels that are stunning, and they're so operational, and they're beautiful, and they're really just made out of bent birchwood. It's like these are not fancy things. Incredible skill making them, but there's nothing technologically like really advanced about that. And just seeing that in the same way when we stopped with at the fish camp, and you have to remind me that guy's name.
Yeah, Gino
and Bruce. And I mean, it was kind of like going into National Geographic. We wake up and we're essentially sleeping under a tarp that has like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fish hanging up drying, just a bunch of blue tarps, the fires under them. I mean, it really, like, you could have been doing the same thing 30 years ago. You could have been doing the same thing probably 100 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
A little different tarp material.
And that was one of my favorite stories too, is the fish camp story. Is we were somewhere in the Yukon flats, where it gets real braided, and we're coming around a corner, and we see a huge fish wheel. And a fish wheel is basically, it's hard to describe, but it's a massive, like, it's almost like a miniature Ferris wheel that's set in the water, and it's used to catch salmon. Salmon swim upstream, and they'll swim in this fish wheel, and the current of the water spins the wheel, and as salmon swim into it, it lifts up out of the water and then basically funnels the salmon into a holding tank. And so Jackson, we were like paddling over to check out this fish wheel that was going, and all of a sudden there's a guy kind of on the point, and he's yelling at us, and he's like, "Hey, come over here!" And so we paddle up, and lo and behold, it's this guy Bruce and his buddy Gino, who have set up their annual fish camp. And a fish camp, if you ever hunt, a deer camp is a common term, or elk camp for us around here. But basically, it's just a place that they go away from town, away from the village, where they set up for 2 or 3 weeks, and they catch all of their salmon for the season and for the year. And that's what a lot of what they sustain themselves off of. So they have this like base camp, essentially is a good term for it. They call it fish camp, like a base camp setup. And it's like an annual party, basically, of going to fish camp. And there's salmon hanging from trees all around us. There's a big smoking center going on as we pull up. And we end up staying the night and the next day with them. And just that whole experience was amazing, man. What do you remember about that?
I mean, it all started with cold beer again. Someone in the middle of nowhere with beer that's like 10 times the price it should have been, offering us cold beer. And I remember, like in my mind, I got off that boat to be there about 15 minutes, and then like 2 days later, we're packing up. But I mean, just like everywhere else, it's just the generosity. I mean, these guys instantly just started feeding us salmon and bread, and I think we had soup. They sent us along with that bag of I can't remember what the cuts were, but a big bag of moose.
Yeah.
But what was interesting was I was always a little nervous of the fish wheels, and there's some territorial aspects with them, like people get a little nervous.
Yeah, it's how they feed their family.
Yeah, so it's easy for a boat to come up and like maybe steal someone's fish. So I remember like pulling up to that fish wheel and being like, when I saw that person, thinking like, we might want to paddle away. We don't want to have them think, but calls us over, and so these fish wheels also stick out in the river. It isn't like it's right on the shore. So there's some really skinny, slick, wet birch logs essentially sticking out maybe 15 feet, holding that fish wheel off the side. And after maybe 5 or 6 hours there, we're running across those little logs with the kids, and these are like kids. I mean, I think there was like a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 12-year-old.
Yeah,
and they're running through these logs, these slick little logs, to go get the fish out of the fish wheel box. The wheel spins, dumps them in a box. And at first I remember thinking like, there's no way you're going to get me to walk across one of those logs. and the river's flowing, at that point I remember it was kind of cooking still.
Oh yeah.
But by the end of it, it's like, we're just kind of doing the normal and walking across the logs, checking it out, acting like, this is what we've been doing for the last 20 years. And, but then I remember being so tired leaving that camp, get back in the boat eventually. We made it about a mile, and I think we got out and took a nap. And,
I learned so much, and it was such an awesome experience. Yeah, the first day it was just Gino and Bruce, the two guys holding down camp, and then the next day we stayed with them, and like the whole family came. So there was a bunch of kids running around, and it was kind of like, it was a little bit like anarchy. It was like Uncle Bruce and Uncle Gino have the kids at fish camp for the week, and they're running around barefoot. There's shotguns and rifles, right next to the thing. We're surrounded in grizzly country by, probably 500 hanging salmon. And yeah, it was just a wild experience and an awesome experience. How about wildlife? Do you have any wildlife stories that come to the forefront? I got a few, but I'm curious what yours are.
I have a few. With the wildlife though, what was crazy, and I think what I was expecting that didn't happen. I thought we were going to have bear problems the whole time, and so like, I know you've talked about this trip a few times with some other people on the Yukon, but like, I don't know, that first like 3 weeks, we were so cautious. And anytime we saw a bear footprint, anytime we saw a wolf footprint or a cat footprint or even a moose footprint, we would like pack up. We wouldn't stay there. And by the end of it, like, there's bear prints all over the site. I mean, I remember there was one time it was that we were camped on an island in the Yukon Flats. We paddled, I think, all night long, and then we tried to sleep outside, and the wind was too bad, and we eventually go in the tents. But I remember, that was still at the point where we're checking for tracks. So we got to that camp, and I know we checked for tracks, and we didn't see any. And then I wake up the next morning, and you can see a bear tracks going right out of the river, and they walked right up to the tent, and then they turned around and went back in the river. And so it's like it's almost the interactions we didn't have that are probably like the scariest. But the moose
along that lines quickly though, yeah, like exactly like you said. When we first started, I remember our hard and fast rule was if we see any signs of bear, moose, cat, any fresh scat, any footprints around our camp, we'll just pick up and move to the next one. And then exactly like you said, like by the end of the trip or like halfway through the trip, we're like, well, that was a stupid rule. It's like walking through downtown Manhattan or Chicago and saying if there's a Starbucks, you have to turn around.
No, exactly. And then when we got further in the trip too, it's like it wasn't like the campsites were abundant. I mean, we were searching sometimes for hours and hours and hours, and I remember getting to sites sometimes, and we're kind of weighing like, man, it looks like a bear was there like 5 minutes ago. Should we camp here? And we're tired. And it's like, man, yeah. I mean, it's probably fine. We'll just say, hey, bear, a bunch of times.
Keep in mind, yeah, we got no weapons, just a can of bear spray and a bunch of food.
Everyone thought we were crazy for. I don't think we met one person that went like, yeah, good idea not to bring a gun. But the other time that sticks out probably the most, and it was later on in the river. So a little background. It essentially didn't rain for like 40 days. Like I remember it was just hot and it was dry, and like it didn't rain for the first like essentially month and a half, and then it started raining, and then it didn't stop raining for a really long time, and so we were in the rainy section, and it was a hard day. And I remember it was the classic. We kept trying to find a place to have camp, and it isn't like you can just pull off and like climb up the bank. The problem was where we're going through, there's like 15-foot tall cut banks, so there's no getting up them. They're eroding. You hear them falling in. You hear trees falling in the river. So if you can't get out of the river, you can't get out of the river. So we paddled really, really late that night, and at this point it was getting dark, and we get to a sandbar, and there's bear tracks, and a little bit before that camp we saw a bear on the other side of the river in the distance. And I remember we get out, and I don't even know if we heated it up, but we had like some Indian curry packets, and we just kind of like ate them out of the bag. All we did was set up the tents and go in the tents. And I remember laying there, and Will's maybe 20 feet away from me in his tent. I'm in my tent, and neither of us have fallen asleep because we only got in the tents maybe 20 minutes ago. And you just start hearing like bears growling at each other. And I never saw them, so I don't know how far away they were. But at the time, and being dark and where we were, it seemed like they were right outside the tents. And they were growling loud and like fierce. They didn't sound happy. And I remember yelling over to you like, hey, what do you think we should do? And I think we both decided like, I'm not getting out of the tent.
Yeah, I think I popped I was like, what do you think we should do? I was like, and we both started yelling like, hey, bear. It's literally, for what I remember, it sounded like, again, you have to preface it by, it was like we'd gotten to the tent, just barely fallen asleep. We're right on the water, but it sounded like two bears freaking battle royale-ing it, like, battling it to the death, like right next to our tent is what it sounded like. It was like the most like gnarly carnivorous, like werewolfish type sound and grunting that I've ever heard. And yeah, I remember like popping my head out and then being like, I think I remember popping my head out and being like, yeah, they're not on our island. We're like, okay.
Yeah. And to think back, like if we would have heard that 5 weeks prior, we would have been in the boat down the river away from that. But like at this point, we were so tired, and it wasn't like we were tired from that day. I mean, for me at least, I mean, I was tired at that point. I mean, it was tricky, and it just didn't matter. It was like, you know, the Bears, they're gonna do what they're gonna do.
The other one, the other two that I remember that stick out to me are the first one, which I've told before, but is the grizzly and the wolves. Right at the start, in the 30-mile section there. It's like this beautiful, crystal clear turquoise section, and we had just come out of Lake LaBarge, and we were turning the corner, and we saw like a big grizzly. I remember we had some music going, and we saw like this big, gnarly grizzly bear, like blonde grizzly bear, kind of parading along the side. And we were like, whoa, turned the music off, watched him. He kind of skirted off into the woods. And then we turned around the very next bend, and there was that 3-pack of wolves. And I'll never forget how, like, the two of the wolves, big white wolves with, like, the red kind of tint down their backs, and two of the wolves ran out back into the woods. And then the one, which must have been the alpha, just, like, came down to the water's edge and just stared at us as we floated by, and we stared right back at him. That was gnarly.
Yeah, I remember that being like one of those first moments of going like, what have I gotten into? Day three, I've never really seen a wolf up close. Being in Montana, I've seen them through the scopes before in Yellowstone, but like, this wolf was like 25 feet away, and it looked at you with this like kind of like smirky grin on its face, like, I'll kill you. And, no, that was major.
That was a good one. And then the other, all of these stick out, but obviously all kinds of moose. It was like every morning we woke up and there was like a massive moose right outside of our tent, basically. Very, very common. But I remember one in particular. I think we had just stopped for lunch. Or maybe we were like slow packing up, aka I was slow packing up, and the moose was on our island, and it was kind of like meandering around, and then all of a sudden it got in the water, and we watched it like dive in the water, and at this point the river must have been like 2 or 3 miles wide. Like it was a massive channel, fast moving. It was probably moving 4 miles an hour, just the current itself. And I just remember watching this moose get in the river like, holy cow, he is swimming towards the main channel. He's really going to try and swim 4 miles across this freaking fast river. And I remember watching him and him just getting washed down. He was making his way across, but just getting washed down until like his head bobbing became just a dot like 3/4 of the way across.
Yeah, no, I remember the same thing. I mean, we watched them for miles, and I remember that it's one of those that, you're talking about one of those memories that stick out. Like that camp, for whatever reason, I can remember like every detail about. I can remember like the fire, and spilling my hash browns that I just spent like an hour trying to make. And oh man, the moose and I always really liked the cat sightings. There weren't a ton of them, but we saw some lynx, and that's one of the first times I realized cats can swim, because I think every time we saw a cat was on an island, and they had to get there somehow. So.
How about, do you have a favorite town or village that we stopped through?
I mean, Galena with Jake the Russian, was really nice, and we ran into a lot of nice people there, and we were able to get what we wanted. I don't think Dawson counts, but
I think Dawson counts.
Well, it counts, but like, we had these circumstances on the trip where I had 8 days in Dawson, and it's just like the wildest, craziest, like it's like a Wild West town.
Dawson City in the Yukon Territory. Keep going. It's literally is like a town out of a Western.
It's crazy. So Dawson was the center of the Klondike Gold Rush in its like heyday, and so it's a town that 120 years ago had 100,000 people in it. Now only has 4,000 residents. but it has still that old downtown infrastructure of what it was 120 years ago. So it's literally like, like you're spilling out of the bar through two swinging doors onto a wooden boardwalk, then down onto a dirt street. And it's like Jackson Hole if it hadn't been like all, kind of faked and redone. And so, I mean, it was just an incredible place. And then we stayed at this campground that was on the other side of the river. And to get there, you had to take this crazy barge, like multiple times a day, that was free, and it ran all night long. And it's just an insane place. I mean, you're at the top of the world, and we coincidentally ended up there for something like Top of the World Biker Festival.
Yeah.
And it was like the premier bike festival for like adventure. I'm not sure what they call it, but like adventure motorcycle riding,
Yep.
everyone with their Yamahas and their BMWs and, their big saddle boxes.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, just
it was
incredible memories.
Just an awesome town. And it was, so it was one of the only hubs, that was still connected to Whitehorse, which is where we started at the big city. And it was still early on in the trip. But one of the things that I thought of earlier when we were talking, and you mentioned not taking a gun with us and how everybody was so surprised, and that was one of the things everyone was I guess surprised with. The other thing is that I thought about is the shot, the sour toe cocktail.
Oh, I forgot
in
about
Dawson
the sour
City.
toe.
Give me a breakdown of the sour toe cocktail. What is the
man.
sour toe cocktail?
So the sour toe cocktail, I can't remember the name of the bar, but if I can find my wallet, I bet I still have my little membership card
ID.
But what they have in this bar is they have these glass jars filled with salt that have amputated toe.
We
have had.
We got paused for a second there. Hang on 1 second. Okay, we're good. Hey, you there? You got me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay,
I got
cool.
you.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Pause for a second there, but okay, yeah. So I was at I lost you at Amputated Toes, which is a great place to pick back up again.
Yeah. So you go into this bar, and it looks like a normal bar. It's actually a nice bar, and it, again, like this classic West thing. They had like a person playing the piano, and they're playing that music you kind of hear in these old Western music movies. And but yeah, behind the bar they have all these glass jars filled with salt with these like black decrepit looking toes in them. And what this bar is famous for is polar explorers and Arctic explorers and people doing crazy stuff and people running the Iditarod. This is also one of is kind of commence, and also the finish line for some of the biggest river races in the world. So when people get their toes amputated, it's kind of like an honor to then take that toe and send it to this bar, so all their patrons can rip shots with it in the shot glass. And so
it's a drink they're famous for. It's on like lists of all kinds of like the oddest and strangest bar and restaurant offerings, and it's called the sour toe cocktail.
Yeah. So next time you're ripping a shot with a cricket or a scorpion in it, just know there's one out there with a human toe in it.
And all kinds of funny things about this story. But the one thing that I remember is that we had known about this drink, and literally it's a mound of salt. There's a guy there, Captain Dick is his name, funny enough, and he.
Yeah, I just read a great article on him too.
Really, that's good.
Yeah.
He sits behind a desk with a huge mound of salt, takes one of the amputated toes, sets it on the mound of salt. People pay and line up. They have a drink of their choice. You go up to the bar where Captain Dick is, set it down. He picks up the toe off the salt, puts the toe in your drink, says some little rhyme about how the toe has to touch your lips in order for the drink to count. And there you go. You take the shot and the toe falls and touches your lips. And It's absolutely disgusting even just to talk about it and to think that we did that. And the funny thing is I remember, as I mentioned, is that we'd both known about it. It was like a known thing. It was like, Dawson City has this. It was like, oh my God, that is so disgusting. There is no way that I am ever doing that. There's no way I'm taking a shot with a human's toe in it. And And then we had a few days off in Dawson, and we were bellied up at the bar for a couple days, and we watched all these tourist buses come through with like moms from Indiana lining up to take the shots, and we sat there for like 3 days. It's like, gosh darn it, if if Nancy over there is ripping the shot, I guess I have to.
No, I mean, really memorable. And I remember too. I mean, it was just the most uncleanly thing, that could possibly be going on, and like the person coughing on the toe before like even putting it in the drink, and these toes aren't just like dried and shriveled up; they're like flaking off. There's pieces torn off. They're like completely falling apart. And what I wish I knew is whose toe we ripped. I hope it's some like big Iditarod winner.
So gross.
Yeah. What for you? Like, another big part of that trip for me was the food, and and I've thought a lot about, that trip kind of set a lot of precedent for like cooking for me on the river since, and there's a lot of things I adopted, but for me, like, I remember there's like 4 or 5 things food wise that essentially like saved my life. Like did you have
absolutely
like a couple meals?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of things that are stuck in my mind. I think that I am not as food centric, but the things that stick in my mind, a couple things. One is that for breakfast, for like it felt like the first half of the trip. For breakfast every morning, we would have multiple cups of coffee, and then we would have rehydrated hash browns, but not fried. We would just put them in our cereal bowl, our little Nalgene breakfast bowl, rehydrate them cold, and put Parmesan cheese on them, and then just eat the cold, raw, rehydrated hash browns with Parmesan cheese. And I remember actually liking it, like being like, yes, calories, like this is pretty good.
Yeah, me too.
So that
I do remember it was a game changer though when we were like, oh, we could fry this.
Yeah, it's like, wait a minute, we don't just have to eat them cold, rehydrated. We could actually just make a fire and stick them on the frying pan. So that was one of them for me. Another one, of course, was the peanut butter Ritz peanut butter sandwiches that I had like 10 million of.
Life-saving.
I smuggled them back when I flew in to Dawson City in the Canadian Border Patrol. I didn't mark them on my customs, and I had like literally a whole backpack completely stuffed to the brim with peanut butter sandwich crackers. And I remember the border agent stopped me in Ottawa and was like, "Excuse me, sir, what's going on here?" I'm like, in like half French. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm going on a canoeing trip and I'm going to be eating all of these." She's like, "This is like several $100s worth of peanut butter cracker sandwiches. Like, you have to declare this."
I remember there was two things you had to get. It was more peanut butter crackers and a solar panel, and that's like all we needed. And,
so that was another one. A couple other things that really stick out. One would be all of the fresh salmon that we had along the way. We prepared it and had it prepared for us so many different ways. Between the salmon sticks is not the salmon strips.
Kind of jerky style.
Yeah, jerky style. The salmon canned and jarred and seasoned with olive oil. I think that was some of the best. Yeah. What about you?
Well, yeah, the potatoes with the Parmesan. I mean, that was a big savior. Like people got to understand. It isn't like you have a cooler. Like we started with 100% dry goods. And that's all we have. We I think one time we bought eggs. So, but the second half of the trip, it was berry season, and we started being able to make all of the raspberry and blueberry pancakes.
That's right.
And that was like incredible. I mean, every time we had it, and I remember like. I remember one day right at the end, maybe like 4 or 5 days, and we've been in the rain, and it was like that day the rain like stopped. And I remember like when that blue sky opened and we're sitting there like, it's just going to be another sucker hole, which a sucker hole is like a little piece of blue sky that doesn't actually turn into anything. And then it opened up, and I remember like right next to it, we had that big berry kind of field, and
yep.
and and like there was a big turn, like for me personally, I think like the 10 days prior to that, they're hard, like, weren't the most enjoyable. Have been raining, for weeks and weeks. And then we had these like amazing last 5 days, but at the end of the trip in that rainy season, it was when all the berries were popping. So we were able to do the raspberries and the blueberries. And they had those the smaller ground berries that we're eating. I forget what they're called. But,
they're really good.
Pesto night for me was always a really good one.
We had a good amount of pesto nights. I remember a pesto with some fresh salmon one time. That was a highlight towards the end of the trip.
Yeah. Yep. And with a lot of curry. But another thing, it's like it isn't like we had the Coleman either. We did all this on like one single Whisper Light.
Yeah, we had a Whisper Light, or most of the time too. Lots of times we were just cooking over the fire. Which I like doing, and we should do more of when we go camping now.
No, that kind of changed my way of cooking. And some of that started because Jackson bought the wrong type of fuel, bought a gallon of the wrong fuel in Dawson. And so we had
I forgot about that.
that dirtier fuel that wouldn't run through our fuel lines.
That's right. Yeah, we bought a you're right.
Naphtha.
Yeah, slightly dirtier fuel that wouldn't work through our Whisper Lights. So we were cooking over all open fires. That's right. What you mentioned, like the challenging parts. What were some of the overarching challenges from your perspective?
For me, it took a little while to like accept, I think, like what the trip was and the length. I feel like I had a good chunk at the beginning where I'm still mentally like fighting the length. And I remember you telling me before we started, you just got to kind of go with the flow and it's, like there's no need to rush anything. But on a trip that long, you see sometimes when you're not making the miles and that there's still like 1,400 miles ahead of you and the weather's getting bad. And it's hard not fighting the time. And another thing with the time is we disagreed on the watch. And so I wore a watch and you didn't wear a watch. And I think the watch beeped every once in a while, like every hour or something, the watch would do a little beep. And it really wasn't loud, but like when it's the only thing that's happening like in the day is that beep, it drove you crazy, I think. And then I remember I broke the watch. And like, for me, that was like a big moment.
You were freed from the watch.
Like I broke the watch. Like, how am I gonna like? And it's like 24 hours a day. So like trying to tell like what time it is, and like for some reason, like at the beginning, like time was like a really comfort to me. Like being able to track time, being able to track progress based on like the watch that was on my wrist, was huge. And I remember, and I can't remember what I was doing. I think I was trying to like get the beep to turn off, so I could stop bothering you. And I ended up breaking the watch. but that was a real good thing to happen, actually. When I look back on the trip and some of the things that you told me I should do at the beginning and like at the end of the trip, I'm thinking like, oh, I should have just done those things from the get-go. And the watch was one of them. We're in this incredible trip, and there's a few trips you get to do where like the sun doesn't go down for so long, and like getting lost in time is actually like really kind of pleasant. And so we're going, and when we had 24-hour sunlight was when we started the Yukon Flats. That was around solstice. And that's when we were most northern. We just crossed the Arctic Circle for a little bit. And yeah, I mean, if without a time or a phone, I mean, you could really have no idea like what was happening.
Totally.
And so, I think just dealing with that. And then the other really hard parts were, we never didn't paddle because of rain, but we couldn't paddle because of wind.
Yeah, there were several days we were windbound.
Yeah, where, Will and I are in separate tents, which, that's probably one of the best choices we made.
That was by far the best choice.
Yeah, I can't imagine like what it would have been like being in a tent with someone, but we had a couple times where it was like 2 or 3 days, and again, it's not getting dark, and we're just laying in a tent, and it's blowing so hard that there's no point to be outside. And so you just laid in the tent for 3 days. The light didn't change. You don't really know what's happening. And, you take a nap and you wake up and the wind, all the sand had blown under the fly, and you're covered in sand head to toe, and you're just laying there. And I mean, those are tricky. And I remember one in like particular, I mean, it was really long, and it was just like, it was never ending. I mean, without the light changing, there's just nothing to like, just laying there. 24
hours sunlight. I remember exactly what you're talking about too. There was 2 times, but one in particular that I remember. Yeah, we were windbound, and it had been kind of nice out, so we were just being lazy. And of course, the one time you're being lazy is the one time it crushes you. We didn't set up our our rain fly over our tents. And of course, in the middle of the night, it picks up and starts getting really windy and whips all of the sand into our tent. So I remember I get up in the middle of the night, already drenched in like 2 inches of sand. And I put the rain fly on, but I don't stake the rain fly out all the way in like a sleepy stumber. And then it just so happened that the rain fly was whipping in such a way that the inside of my tent just became like a funnel. Like the sand was coming in and just getting like, rip-tided around like a washing machine within my tent. And there was just sand everywhere. That was tough. The other thing that I remember that you alluded to too, which was tough, was the weather towards the what I recall being like the last maybe quarter of the trip or so. It was just like everything was perfect, hot, sunny, 24 hours of sunlight before. And then all of a sudden, as we started working our way into August and a little bit before, it was just like shitty rain, windy, clouds. I remember there was like a 2-week stretch, what is what I recall, of straight clouds, rain, wind, where we could not get any of our stuff dry. It was like we were soaked in our rain gear. The rain gear wasn't really doing anything because it was just thoroughly drenched anyway. And then you get out and you like set up the tent or bug tarp and like strip down, and all of your clothes are just like completely soaked, and you might have like 1 or 2 pieces of dry stuff from the day before, but it's still probably a little damp anyway. It's like those times were kind of tough.
Oh, it weighs on you. And I remember in those times too, I mean, it was cold too. Like I remember getting out of the boat and running sprints and doing jumping jacks, and like just, we're sat there so long, and your legs are kind of losing circulation from the canoe seats and just being so chilly. It was really tricky, the weather change. And what's also tricky with the weather change is like, the first 40 days are all sunny. That's also when all the nice campsites were, when it was like gravel bars and nice places to camp. So as soon as the rain starts, that's also like when we started like just camping in like these muddy like willow groves that are overgrown, and there's no nice places to camp. It's just like, so you can't even like do the gravel bars anymore, and there's no wood anymore because we're so far from the forest at this point. And so you're trying to like mix, like you're getting the worst of like all these things all at the same time. And I remember like myself, like, more than once, losing my temper a little bit, and eventually just like, I had a couple breakdowns, and I in my mind, they're all short-lived.
No. Well, it's funny that you say the watch thing, because I have like a couple of things that I've thought about too, but I didn't even remember the watch thing. I didn't even think about your watch beeping or like, any of those things. I didn't even think about it until you tell me. But the one thing that I do think about is that I remember, I think that we were smooth sailing throughout the whole trip. And that's pretty good considering 2 guys who spend, pretty much 24 hours a day together in a boat in the middle of nowhere for 70 days nonstop. That's a lot. That's a lot of anybody, no matter who you are.
Especially when it takes teamwork to complete the task. Like it doesn't work unless you can actually work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And we crushed it and we did great. But the one thing I remember is I think I was just like sleeping in a bunch, and I didn't realize how much earlier you had been getting up than me, which of course is classic. And yeah, so there's a little miscommunication on the schedules, which I think we worked out. But
I think we did too, and I think there's so many factors too. Like I remember one time getting particularly upset with you for like sleeping in. And I think like out of spite, like I packed up all my stuff. So like when you had gotten out of your tent, you know, like my stuff's already all in bags and barrels and like ready to go. But I also remember that like a lot of those times when that kind of stuff happened, like we were also out of water.
Yeah.
You know, there's like these other factors where it's like we didn't have water, we didn't have coffee. Like, you know, like I'm like got like 2 sips left of my Nalgene, and the only place to get water is to like get on the boat. So it was like,
yeah,
you know, these compounding things. And
yeah, but I'd say it's pretty good. I would say though, looking back on it, if you were to do it again, I guess I'll start since it's already on my mind. My question is, what would you do differently? I think I would take 2 individual boats. Remember, we saw one other group that had like 2 kayaks. I think that would be a good way to do it, just because it splits up the time. You're not locked with, you know, Jackson stinky butt all day, every day. I can get a little bit of my own fresh air.
No, I agree. I think doing it in 2 boats would be great. Me personally, you know, we saw a lot of people doing it solo. I don't know if I'm like strong enough mentally to actually spend that much time alone. With how few people you actually see on the river. But I know at the time, I'm sure I was not thinking this, but looking back, like I would extend like the beginning and the end of the trip by 2 weeks each, you know, like try to just get as much time in there, do those upper lakes, do Atlin Lake, do all of Marsh Lake.
Yeah.
When I talked to, we met these guys in a little village kind of maybe 15 days before the end, who we became great friends with. One of them became my roommate. Well, one of them became Will's roommate when he got done with the trip. Then another one of them became my roommate about a year later. And it's all just coincidental. But they had done all the upper lakes. So they got a couple hundred extra miles of lake paddling, doing the true like source lakes of this river. And there's a couple things, you know, I remember with Patrick. So we met this incredibly nice man, very shy man named Patrick. And I can't remember the name of the town. It was by Russian Village somewhere.
He was in Russian Mission, I think.
Okay, yeah, it was Russian Mission then, and he offered to take us on his motorboat back up river and hike this mountain, and at the time it was just like, we got to get done, you know, like we've been sitting in the rain for a few weeks. We're 10 days from the end, you know, every day we take off, it's another day. You know, it's another day we're on the river, we're in the rain, and like those are the things I look back on, like, you know, should have went hike that mountain, should have went moose hunting with someone, should have like done these things. But it's always easier to say it, you know, after the fact too.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the time we're tired, you know, it's and we had a mission, and the weather wasn't getting better.
Yeah.
You know, so we did have to get down and.
But I know what you mean. There's always opportunity for more, and it's always, especially looking back on things, right? Like looking back on things, it's so much easier to see from a broader perspective. Like, yeah, take your time, like enjoy it, you know, explore every aspect. But when you're in the moment, and like you said, you're hungry and you're cold and you're wet, and you know, you can see the finish line on the horizon, it's harder to stay. To see that perspective, you know. Yeah,
no, definitely, and so like, you know, I like to think in future trips, you know, things are going to go a little different. I know, like, you know, there'll be more talk than like actually, like I would do, but yeah, I mean, if I could do that trip one more time, it'd be to add time to it. Just even though we went slow sometimes, we were probably slower than most people's trips, like. I mean, yeah, you could stretch it out. Yeah,
there's no reason to rush. Enjoy it, right? And so the other story and thing I want to talk about too, which I've written down and we forgot to mention, and then we'll slowly wrap it up, is the other people that we ran into that stick out to me is our interactions with Jerry and Scott in the Yukon Charlie Preserve. These two guys that we ran into, we were just crossed over the border into Alaska, and we're in this national park, basically, a Yukon Charlie River Preserve, I think is what it's called. And it's like 3 a.m. The sun is still out, as we mentioned, 24-hour sunlight, and we just set up our tents and gone to bed. And all of a sudden, I remember you poked your head out of your tent, and you're like, "Is that a motor?" And I was like, in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, in the middle of the night, we're like, oh, wait a minute, I think that is a motor. And these two guys pull up, and they're, I don't know, maybe mid-50s, maybe a little older, and they hop out of their motorboat, and they're like, hey, can we camp with you guys? And we're like, yeah, sure. So basically they come down, and we start talking to them, and they're two veterans and guys who are still in the active service, I think, and have been all over the world. And we end up spending basically like 3 or 4 days cruising with them, and them telling us all their stories. And that interaction was a fun one.
No, that was great. I mean, one of my favorite lines from like that trip is like these guys getting out of the boat, and again, like we're on a dry food diet. We rehydrate things. We're eating powdered sauces, and I don't know which one of them gets out of the boat, and their boat was a little out of control. So like we kind of go out there and we help them get it up onto this rocky bank, and they go like, "You guys like porterhouses?" And like, it's like, hell yeah, we like porterhouses. Like, and they like pull out these like 20-ounce steaks, that like I just like we haven't had for weeks, and it was just great. And I mean, we must have stayed up till like 6 a.m.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember so many funny stories about it. But as we were unloading their boat, again, you and I were packed for this 70-day trip. As you mentioned, we've got all this dry food. We're fairly lean. I mean, we have a lot of stuff in the boat, but all of our stuff for 70 days. And then these guys come by. All we have is bear spray with us. And these guys come out like they're looking they're ready to overthrow the Capitol or something. They've got they've got so many rounds of ammunition, 50 cals, rifles, pistols, you name it. They had everything on there ready for bear attacks.
Oh man, it was insane. I mean, they had like pistols in each thigh, like a gun draped over their back, another one in their hand. I mean, I remember the next day at that really crazy cabin we stayed at. Another one of the most memorable
trapper
parts
cabins.
of the trip. Yeah, the trapper cabin. Yeah, you find these cabins on the river in Alaska, and a lot of them are public use, and you can use them. But they're kind of like ominous looking. You go up to them, and all the blinds are shut. And it isn't just like wood shutters on these things. It's wood shutters with like 10-inch nails sticking out of them to stop the bears and the cats and whatever from getting in. And Will, and so we're in week 4 of this. We've been doing this for a while. We feel comfortable. Will goes fishing as he does, and Jerry and what was the other guy's name? Scott, they just could not handle it. They were positive. So I'm standing there with them, and they're just positive you're gonna get eaten by a bear. And I remember Scott looking at Jerry, just going like, "Yeah, I don't feel good about this, Jerry. Jerry, get that rifle on him." And Jerry gets there on the log and has the rifle not pointed at Will, but just like pointed in your direction to shoot a bear if it comes. And then like you're out on this peninsula, and you kind of walk around the edge, and you go out of sight. And Jerry again's like, "Yeah, I'm not liking Jackson. You get in that canoe, go find him." And
of course, I was just around the corner having a good time fishing.
No problems. There's nothing happened.
Those guys were great, though, man. Some of their stories from the military service around the world, and we ended up spending a few nights with them, just kind of floating along with them. Those guys were awesome, and I remember shooting their 50 cal at empty whiskey jugs, which maybe is not the best.
Yeah, I have a picture of one of those rounds in my hand, and it's like the length of my entire palm.
Oh yeah, those guys were good. So what was your what's your overarching takeaway from 70 days across the Yukon?
It was a good practice in patience and just slowing down. I mean, I remember one like thinking about, like, even consciously on the trip, thinking about how I wasn't really thinking about anything. Like at some point your mind kind of clears, and you're just like, there's nothing worth thinking about. You can't stress about anything because you're not going to get anything accomplished because you're on the river, for the next couple months. And so like, I remember like just that piece of like finally getting to a place where you don't actually have to worry about everything because everything's out of your control. And like that just being like one of the greatest parts. And I think that's what I want most, like in doing another trip. And you try to get that with these short trips. We do all these 4 or 5 day trips, But you only get that one little like 3-hour window somewhere on like day 3 where like, you know, you're still a couple days from the end. You're past all the bullshit of like trying to get the trip together.
Yeah.
Where like on a trip like 70 days, I mean, you get like a good like couple months in the middle where it's like that. And
It's the best.
and that, I think that's what I'm like searching out now. And it's hard to like think like it's, you know, the way life's kind of progressed, like it's a lot trickier to kind of get into a spot like that right now. And but I mean that's what I want back again, you know. That's like what I want to do again.
I totally get it, man. I totally understand, and that is the best, is that that totally living in the moment. And like you said, it is harder to get it on some of the shorter trips because you come into it all riled up. It takes a few days to decompress, and then you're done. And yeah. And we've mentioned it a bunch, but just the people and the generosity for me, like the generosity of people in the middle of nowhere, of people everywhere. And, you know, the generosity of people just to help a stranger out, like a random 2 dudes who float up on a canoe and let us take their truck to the grocery store, or, you know, give us a bunch of salmon that they've caught and canned and smoked and whatever it may be. It's like, you know, people are good, right?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's an understatement. I mean, it's just it's amazing. It really is amazing, these people. I mean, they have nothing and they would give us anything. We had people offer us money. We had people offer us to ship us stuff down the river. You know, I mean, anything we could have needed, we could have gotten from people, and people would have given it to us happily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty awesome experience. Well, Jackson, that was fun, man. It was fun talking about stories, and obviously we'll get out and do some of the shorter trips, but I sure hope we can make a longer one happen. Make a longer one happen at some point, man.
I think we will. I feel one brewing. But I appreciate you having me on your show, and you know, it's I never get to talk about it this long. Cicely's, you know, sick of hearing it about it. All my friends are sick of hearing about it. And so it's nice to be able to like actually just kind of chat about it and actually be reminded of some of the things. Cause, you know, like I said at the beginning, like you kind of get focused on these like few memories that for some reason like really stand out, but there's all these other ones. And so no, everyone should get out and do it. I mean, it's a trip of a lifetime.
Absolutely, man. All right, Jackson, thanks, man. Take care, and we'll see you sometime down the line. And there you have it. Episode 43 with Jackson Hill is in the books. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to the podcast. Give us a rating and review on iTunes or Spotify. That really helps us out and helps new people find the show. You can find more info, buffaloroamer.com. Go check it out and go get some fresh air, get outside. We'll talk to you later for the next episode of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors.